Good morning, Morgan. How are you today?
Good morning, Nick. I am well. Happy Friday. Happy December. It is December somehow of 2021. It's crazy. This year has just gone by. Hi to everyone who's joining us. Lovely to have everyone here. If you're here, drop a hello in chat. We'd love to see you.
Yeah,
um,
let's see who's here. Let's see what you guys have been
yeah.
up to. Let us know what you're excited for in this topic, and
Mhm.
let's get it going. What do you got for us, Morgan?
Well, I thought I'd at least just introduce the topic, and then I'm gonna kick it right back to you.
Oh,
The When you had chosen this topic, the science behind sales-driven content, I was really excited because and we say that every week. We're always excited about the topics that we choose, but I think that in marketing, there's a lot of psychology that drives marketing performance, and I think that there's a lot of psychology that can drive sales performance, and that comes down to the way you communicate, how you communicate, your cadence, so much in both the sales and marketing processes. Hi, Nathan, in my chat, I believe. How are you? There's where I really wanted to start. I think the question I had for you, we're going to get to the science in depth today, but what is sales driven content, Nick?
you can answer this in a lot of different ways, but to me, what sales-driven content is content that helps people make a decision that isn't works with how they do it naturally.
Hmm.
Very simple. A salesperson's job is to help people that buy. And so when you have sales driven content, it's taking into account the psychology of how we make decisions to make it easier.
Awesome. Well, that's really straightforward. I was thinking there might be a longer rant there, and I was like,
I, I think we'll get into it more, and I want to keep it really simple
yeah.
just because. So when I started my research for this topic, it
Hmm.
had come from reading Justin Michael's Tech Enabled Sales, and he had recommended a bunch of different books to really dive into the core of sales and look at what the future holds. And diving into the science of selling and the science of content made me realize that we work against ourselves more often than not because we default to what is easiest to us or the company instead of what is best for our customers to make decisions naturally. And so we're actually putting ourselves at a disadvantage. And nothing is more clear than when you get a bad LinkedIn approach. What do you think about that, Morgan?
Totally. I've had a couple bad LinkedIn approaches just this week. And I'm like, what are you thinking? Come on. I think for me, where I know the focus of our conversation today is really going to drive us toward is human behavior and relationship building and how it can be messy and challenging and all the weird quirks people have. But for me, I think everything starts by building trust, by building a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with someone. People don't, the in the marketing world, I think they throw around a lot of like know, like, and trust. People only do business with people who they know, like, and trust, and I'm sure that gets thrown around in sales as well.
Yep.
And it's funny, we spend a lot of time focusing on the knowing and the liking part, and not a lot of time on the trusting part,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of marketing and the outbound sales process especially is get to know my company. I have a new product, or we have something that can solve your problem. You haven't heard of us before, so get to know us. Know what we're offering out in the world. And the hope is that you staff your company well, and you have good creative, and you have good ads, and your content's good, so then people like you. But then trust is just a little more difficult to unpack. It's not as straightforward for human to human relationships, let alone company to company relationships,
Mm-hmm.
because now instead of just trusting somebody in your life, like a close friend who's there for you, no matter what, now you have 8 people at one company trying to trust the entire product team at another company, and seeing how it goes. So I think that there's everything that I think we're talking about today, the science behind sales driven content, is really focused on what it means to build trust and how quirky humans can be around building trust, and how we can basically support, enable, and encourage that for people in their, especially in their sales process. Marketing has its own things, but we're talking sales driven content anyways. So
And you had touched on this before with heuristics, those mental
mental shortcut.
shortcuts.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And they play so much into everything we do, but we don't realize that they're working against us or for us until we know what they are. And one of them is likability bias.
Mm-hmm.
We work with who we like. We also listen to
Yes.
who we like. And so if somebody is not similar to us, or
Mm-hmm.
they start off with a really horrible LinkedIn pitch slap or something, it takes the likability equation away. And
Mm-hmm.
so it'll actually shut their brain off. And the other part is with like status quo bias is that bored people don't buy.
Right.
And so if I don't care what you're talking about, then your company is a waste of my time. Not
Mm-hmm.
that they're good, bad, or sad, is you miss the point, right?
Totally, though. Well, and the likability bias, which is a great term and a first introduction to something more technical, is basically the I think of it like a pastor of a community. If you've ever, I'm not particularly religious, but a bunch of my friends are, and anytime you interact with a pastor at a church, no matter the denomination or any religious leader, they tend to be pretty likable, and that's because, and that's part of the job, obviously, but it's also because we like people who we like we like to hang around with people who make us feel good, who genuinely care about us, who invest their time in the relationship, who show up when it matters, who have the belonging, and or who create belonging, sorry, for us. And I
Mhm.
think we we try and accelerate that when we try and sell. We try
Or
and
bypass it altogether.
bypass it altogether, honestly, usually.
I don't
We try
matter in
and
the
say,
process. You
don't
either
you like
want
our
what I have.
product?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You don't you like our product, right? And that's not enough. I mean, it can be enough. Like, and this is the funny thing. Like, we're talking about something that's more in depth, more long term, more
Hmm.
leverage, basically. And the way I think about leverage, which is everything about what we're talking about, is that you can apply less amount of force at any point in time to get a greater result. So the
Well
reason
said.
that you invest in relationships, the reason that you invest in being likable, building trust, those things that take time, is 6 months down the road, when you have a lot of trust, it becomes a leverage point. And when you need to call somebody, I used to work in municipal government. This is true when you run in a bureaucracy. You build trust and you have leverage points so that when you basically need something, you can exercise that leverage and things move quicker. So
Hmm.
instead of constantly trying to do cold calling, outbound sales, and trying to just get your product in front of people, sure, you'll have a low percentage rate of success. And with better scripts and training, you'll probably have a higher percentage rate of success. But the relationship focus that we're discussing today is about leverage in the long haul, both on the front end of the deal and the back end of the deal. So, if you're in a company where you have a handoff, obviously some of the trust that you're building on the front end will potentially carry over to an account executive or a customer success manager or whoever's in charge of delivery in most organizations. But that's good. That means that client sticks around and the company gets to, keep them for the long haul. So all of this, understanding the science, is just being able to create leverage in the long haul, for people to, have a good dynamic with your firm, even if they're not interacting with you in particular. And I have other thoughts on that, about like delivery and who should do delivery and why that's, this changes that formula, but we can get to that later.
And it's even as simple like going back to your example there about the handoff.
Hmm.
Well, how people are presented makes a huge difference on first impressions. And so
Hmm.
there's a priming effect, and you could call it persuasion, that if you introduce them as an expert or as a specialist in that particular thing that they're going to be talking about, it instantly gives them more credibility because it's not them telling you, it's someone else referring them.
Right. It's sort of like that sage on the hill idea, that if you have a problem, the old story goes, go see the sage on the hill. right? Because the sage has the answer to all your problems. So if the handoff, so this is a great example. We can dive into this specifically.
Okay.
What Nick is talking about with persuasion, or how you're doing the handoff, how you're basically positioning somebody inside the sales process. If you've gotten a client to the point in which they're basically ready to buy and now you need to hand them off to another salesperson, you can introduce that other salesperson as, oh, they'll take care of the details. Now, being the buyer on that end of the transaction, I'm like, oh, great. I get to deal with somebody who takes care of the details. Like, that's like a very specific languaging example that I hear used a lot. Whereas you could introduce the account executive, the CSM, or whoever's actually fulfilling the transaction and saying, this is Jace or whoever. And Jace is an expert in helping, our customers answer all their questions and feel like they're super successful with our company. We can get into social proof in a second. He's handled companies like yours in the past. And I really appreciate his insights when it comes to the specifics of any transaction. So this is Jace. Like, the way that gets positioned inside the sales process is very different. And that's all just languaging. It's basically setting up somebody's expectation of who they're going to interact with. And that applies on the front end as well, let alone on the handoff. Like, you can create expectations inside your copywriting. You can create expectations inside your outbound scripts or your cold calls or whatever else. And that creates a priming effect, as Nick said, that gets the brain juices flowing and says, oh, this is probably what I'm going to expect from this company. And that's actually, can I take a sidestep? I know every week I find a way to insert branding.
Only because, and we'll talk about this later, there's a
Mhm.
driver of this when I tell him not to do it.
Mhm.
It's like an open door. It's like,
It's like,
don't touch
don't think
wet
about an
paint.
elephant. Yeah,
And what
right?
do?
Don't touch the wet
Touch the
paint.
wet paint.
You touch the wet paint.
Okay, buddy, fire away.
But this is why the visual and the written word, but especially the visual style of a brand, is a big leverage point. Because if you're selling a product to, let's say, lawyers, your visual style needs to communicate the expectation that your product is for lawyers. Or similarly, if you think about all of the sort of startup sites that have popped up over the last decade, they all have a similar sort of visual style. There's illustrations, there's sans serif fonts, there's bright colors usually, there's clean layouts, maybe gradients now that the web can handle that. All of that is for the purpose of priming us subconsciously to expect something from that company. So then when you go to a different site and you don't see the sans serif fonts with the clean backgrounds and all the rest, and it's kind of wonky formatted or it doesn't exactly line up, you're also primed to expect something from them. So on the front end, a visual style and also the content that you're fueling in that visual style has a direct relationship with the overall sales cycle and the overall sales process, because it literally creates a psychological priming effect for your buyers that says, is this for me? And if you want them to say, oh yeah, this could be for me. But in other cases, and in brands that I've worked with, they end up at the site and they're like, nah, it may not be for me. I'm not entirely sure if this is for me. So anyways, I really need to purchase a soapbox one of these days so I can
I know, I'm
throw
really
it off the
surprised that you
screen.
haven't,
I know.
and then just like lift it up to let us know that you're going to talk about something. I think it'd be good to go and shift gears and talk about commenting. When we talk about
Mm-hmm.
sales driven content, I'm actually thinking that there's nothing more powerful right now than comments. And a big driver of that is the likability bias.
Mm-hmm.
Because the best way to make you likable is to tell somebody why you like them. And it
Yes.
seems so simple, but that's how it works.
It's
Or something
so
you genuinely appreciate. So when you do
yes.
these very meaningful, thoughtful comments, it is the biggest compliment that you can give. And it kind of goes back to How to Win Friends and Influence People from Dale Carnegie. The sweetest
Mm-hmm.
thing they can ever hear is the sound of their own name. And you're
Yes.
almost playing that on a digital level, but you're complimenting them, and now they feel appreciated. They don't, that fear of rejection has disappeared. And so now every time you're making that social deposit by commenting and complimenting and building up their credibility with you. So now you've made all
Yes.
these deposits. What do you think is going to happen when you go and give them a value statement and ask them to meet with you? Are they going to
Mhm.
listen more than the person that's never heard from you?
Mhm.
And are they going
Well,
to share your content?
right.
And that we'll get into that later, but that's actually one of the biggest parts why we post sales driven content isn't actually as
Mhm.
much just for your audience,
Mm-mm.
but it's for your audience to share because of the trust that's received from a referral and the power of word of mouth.
Well, Brene Brown has this example in one of her earlier books about the marble jar. Trust is a marble jar. And her daughter, when she was younger, had a marble jar in a class, I think. And anytime there was good behavior, somebody would add marbles to the jar, I think the teacher. And if there were bad behavior, marbles would be taken from the jar. People have also talked about trust as a battery. I think all of these things sort of point to the same concept that you can build up trust and you can also lose trust. And so the point of commenting on somebody else's post is to make a little deposit into the marble jar. You're not going to get an immediate referral. You're not going to get an immediate attention. And especially if your comment is just thanks for posting, chances are you're not going to get anything. Like you need to add value. You need to add questions, as we talked about in last week's live show, to be able to make those social deposits, as you said. The same, I mean, this is not complicated. The same principles apply at a party. Like if you're at a
Hmm.
party, you're just making little social deposits. If it's Halloween time, nice costume, little social deposit in the marble jar. Oh, I really like what you did there, or oh, have you heard of this thing? Adding those marble jars or adding marbles to the marble jar, charging up that battery, making social deposits. However you think about trust, it is something that's earned, and the best way to earn it is by showing up. People who are invisible, people who don't show up, don't earn trust, right? If you think of like a local community initiative, this is a great example. We're just going to borrow from all sorts of stories today, Nick.
Let's do it.
If you have a little community garden or you have a little volunteer thing in your neighborhood in which you're supporting other parents with their kids or whatever, who shows up are the people you trust because they showed up, right? And when they continue to show up more and more, the more you trust them. And think of this as almost like, I don't know, jello or something bouncy, so that when something goes wrong, you actually have a little bit of padding, that it's not so brittle. And we could even think of this in a sales cycle. If you have a lot of trust and some detail goes wonky, the fact that you've invested that much trust on the front end means
Well, allow
something
you to ask
can
those
go
big
wrong,
questions and still
right?
go back. Yeah, for
And
sure.
still be fine. And that's
Hmm.
that upfront, like, oh, I'm just here to show up. I'm just here to be generous. Oh, I trust these folks. Like, and trust is much easier to lose than to win, of course. But uh, but the point of investing in it is so that in the future, not only do you have leverage, but you also have some resilience against things that go wrong. Because we live in a complicated world, and some stuff just doesn't happen the way you want it to. And trust is a way to make sure that you don't lose clients just because some detail got wonky and it wasn't mentioned on the front end.
But, value is a big part of the equation, but at the part likability is a huge part as well because
Hmm.
likability and trust is that lubricant that gets the whole process moving. Where if
Hmm.
you don't have trust, it'll lock it up, and
Hmm.
that you can't really move past that because you a whole I can't remember who did the study about expertise, but a big chunk of expertise is just trust, and so you must prove trustworthy before you can be proven expert.
Hmm.
And that
Well,
comes from knowing a lot about your customer. Now think about this. So you're sending out
mhm.
your direct messages right now for your sales driven content. Most people are going for value. Hopefully. Hopefully.
Let's cross our fingers and hope that you're trying to demonstrate value. And yeah.
And you're not just pitching your company or yourself because you haven't earned that right yet. So now we go and take it a step back and you comment on something that's an appreciation of who they are or what they've posted. How does that change the way that they perceive you in starting that conversation? Sales driven content shouldn't be all encompassing. This is another error that I see all the time. People will send, 17 paragraphs in this pitch slap thinking it's going to do the work for them, but it takes out the emotion that drives that home. And so a positive emotion or even just being emotionally connected is what drives a lot of those triggers that make people want to talk to us. And so if they're not emotionally available because they don't trust you or like you, you're done before you start. So think
Hmm.
about changing your approach and adding in before that something that makes you likable, something that makes open, and maybe that's being vulnerable with them. But part of that could be too, you've got to know them a little bit through, and it's like, we we've helped companies like yours, and these are the two most common things. Is this something that you're interested in?
Hmm.
How does that change it by giving them a choice? And we had talked about this before, Morgan. It was the option aversion. There's an
Something
heuristic
like
that
that. Single option aversion. There's like, oh, there's some fancy psychological term for also um, the asymmetric dominance effect. But basically, all of this comes back to
good
that.
memory.
Thank you.
I have to look at the show notes for that one. Well done.
um, but basically, the mistake that I see gets made a lot in post trust building is we give somebody one option. Do you want this glass of water? Yes or no? And we do this in the sales process in lots of ways. Um, you could price your product as a one price, yes or no sort of thing. But aren't people are averse to loss. It's just something about human nature. It's how we're hardwired. It's how our brains work. We are averse to loss. And so
Mm.
the decision that somebody makes when they're selecting an option is not, do I want this? And therefore, what benefits do I get from selecting this glass of water? They ask, well,
I have a good
what if
story
it
about
goes
this.
wrong? Right? Like what do I stand to lose if I select this option? And people weight loss aversion a lot higher than they do the benefits. It's just part of a quirk, it seems, in human nature. So one of the things, the classic marketing trick is the power of three. You could offer people two options, right? Where you say, do you want this one or this one? But the same thing still stands, and that fancier one, the asymmetric dominance effect, has to do with
Or
this,
decoy.
which is basically about providing a decoy option. So two is okay, but the power of three. Let's just use my microphone for an example. Um, do you want the coffee mug, the microphone, or the glass? Well, data shows, and a lot of psychological evidence has shown, not only will people choose one at a higher rate than if they were only given two options, so they have a higher choice rate when they're given three, they often pick the middle one. So whatever one you're presenting in the middle, people tend to choose it. Why? Because it feels safe, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
people are averse to loss. So the one on the extreme feels too extreme because it's too expensive, and the one that's cheap feels too cheap, right? And so they choose the middle one because that's, the right thing. So this is why when you end up on lots of sites, they have three different pricing options, or they have, three different methods to get in contact with someone, or it's this power of three, not just because the
And
brain is good at remembering three, but
that
which it
most
is.
popular tag too that they'll go throw in
And
there, and you're like,
a
oh,
little
I'm doing what's
priming.
popular. Oh,
You're doing a little priming on the most popular, right? That literally people will choose the middle option because that um, uh, that's just how people are wired.
yeah.
So the lesson from this is give people options. Give people options to get in contact with you. Give people options in the sales process. Help people navigate their aversion to loss by providing them some options. Not just, do you want this or not, but of these three things, which would you prefer? And in fact, one of the best, a little tangential, but this is just another way to demonstrate this. Great survey design has people asking the right kinds of questions. So, for example, when I ran a startup week, the year before, they asked feedback about, well, what did you think about the mixture of the number of panels versus the number of keynotes? And it was sort of an
Mm-hmm.
open text field. We did not get a lot of value off of that survey design question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we said, so this next year, when I helped design the survey for feedback, we said, if you had to choose, which would you prefer? And we gave them three options: more
Better
keynotes,
criteria.
more panels, same mix. And we learned a lot from that because
Mm.
it's actually providing somebody an option to choose, and people are more likely to like deliver that feedback. So that's true for when you do follow-up questions with your customers in a win-loss analysis. That's true for any sort of surveys you send out for feedback. Like net promoter score is a fine metric to guess or ask for, but in my experience, it's much better to ask for people to choose. Which would you prefer between 2 or 3? If you had to choose, would you prefer this or that, or this third option? Because that is just an extension of the same scientific principle that we like threes and we like middle options, because we're scared of losing something.
Yeah, we like to fit in.
Yeah.
It's comfortable. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that drives a lot of this is risk aversion. And
Mm-hmm.
it comes with that loss aversion. I have a good example. I As my wife knows, I like to go and use her and the kiddo as guinea pigs for different psychology. She knows it's okay. It's very well noted, and she laughs, especially now because I talk about it all the time. She's like, you did. So I was trying to go and see if it would be better to go and have a punishment for the kiddo. And so, like, if you don't do this, this is not going to happen, or give her the perk, but take it away if something happens. So, like, advent calendars.
Yeah.
And so we were doing something, and I'm like, hey, today we'll get to go into your advent calendar, but we got to make sure we're being
Mm-hmm.
respectful and responsible. What a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
But think about how we're using our content either in individual or at scale that plays to loss aversion. We know our customers well. We should.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they scared of losing? Their job?
Mm-hmm.
Are they scared of losing funding? What are they scared of losing? What could you go and give them and take away? It sounds harsh, but the thing is, sometimes we just don't string the things together in a way that's tangible. We know that it exists there, but we just don't see the consequences of our actions because this, that, or the other thing, we have a lot on our brains. And when you put it in content and they're seeing the logical sequence and then it attaches to an emotion, they're like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
I really need to go and take this meeting because if I don't do this now, I won't be able to do this next thing. And that was the
Right.
one thing I found really interesting is it wasn't budget. Budget's definitely a big part of it, but it was timing was the biggest driver. And I can give this to Kim because Kim pointed this out to me and I was kind of like a light bulb that one of the biggest drivers is timing, but timing is arbitrary until you give it structure.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen because of it? Oh, well, if this doesn't happen, that means that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big driver.
Yep. And that's where really understanding your customers comes in, and being able to talk with them and being able to listen for these things. One of the great skills that great marketers, and I believe great salespeople as well, have is that they're able to listen to a conversation and identify the unsaid things.
Mm.
So it's not just listening at what they say, it's being able to unpack and at least guess what is driving what they're saying. And all of that comes back to their emotional response, their psychological response to different things. To your point, a personal trainer I know charges you a fee and will give you back a certain percentage if you achieve your goals. Right. So it's sort of it's a close inversion of this principle, but it plays on the
Yeah.
same
Clever.
emotional capacity, which is like, I've already spent this money. If I don't meet my goals, I'm going to permanently lose it, or I could win it back. Right. And the same
Mm-hmm.
goes if you're able to frame or position a pitch, or frame or position a conversation around what they're going to lose, more or less, by not engaging with you. It's it's a very cool way to sort of accelerate it. But the most important thing, you actually have to be confident that it's the right thing. And an example that I know, a couple weeks ago, a brand strategist I was talking with, he was looking at supporting more startups, and especially early stage startups. And he was
Mm-hmm.
talking a lot about the benefits of being more confident and more clear in their brand. It's fine. I've pitched confidence and clarity before, and it doesn't go over too well, because psychologically, to buy from somebody who promises you confidence and clarity, you have to at least subconsciously admit to yourself, you're not confident and you're not clear. And most early stage startup founders are not going to be willing to do that.
That's a dangerous
So,
psychological driver to unwillingly poke the bear at.
right. So you have to listen closely and clearly to people, and being able to identify the right sorts of drivers in which they are willing to admit, no, I'm not able to do that, or yes, I am interested in this, because offering some more vague stuff isn't as useful. I see Kit ask a question on my stream. Do you want to throw it up?
Mm-hmm.
And as there are more questions on either of our streams, please pop them into the comments. We're going through some dense stuff today. So Kit asks, should brands offer freemium options to take advantage of loss aversion? When does freemium destroy trust versus create trust? That's a good question. Do you have anything, Nick? I got to think about this one.
Freemium's a great way for people to get a taste of what something's like in their life and how it can deliver on a promise. And so the idea of losing it on freemium only works if you have a trial. So if you have a 14-day trial and you've seen how much easier it can make your life and you're looking at what it's going to be after, that's how trials work, is loss aversion. But only if you make it part of your daily routine or fully push yourself. That's why there's a lot of onboarding. And so the trust really comes to, can you deliver on what you promised? And is it as good as you said? And so there's a few different players in there, but it breaks past the status quo. And, why change? And that's the hardest thing we ever have to answer. And freemium can make it less risky. And the trials is what drives that loss aversion, which makes them want to go into premium options through that product-led growth.
Yeah, and I think product-led growth is there's different ways to do it. I don't know, Kit, if you had asked if freemium in the model was like, here's this something free and then pay to upgrade, or as Nick said, there's a free trial for the full product and then you get downgraded. The loss aversion really comes into the latter half, basically. Does it destroy trust? Not necessarily. I think it comes to whether you're delivering actually what you said you would deliver. I think it can create trust if your product is as good as it says it is. People take a free trial. They're like, I'm so glad that I could have 14 days to try it out. And basically that can establish a new sort of brand for your company, because that's, your prerogative, to be able to create trust. So that's what, at least what came to mind.
And like social proof. Why does social proof work?
Oh,
Calling something out and trying to help people in a way that is relevant to what they're talking about and where they want to go is really powerful social proof. And that's why GE had the whole saying of nobody ever got fired for buying GE, because they were the known, trusted, credible source. So if anybody could do it, it'd be them. And if they didn't deliver, then it was because it couldn't be done. And that's kind of where we want to be in our space, is that we're making highly relevant comments and details that drive people to where they want to go in a way and at a time that is meaningful and not a distraction, and really driving home. People like us do things like this. People like you
the
did
Seth. Hell
this.
yes.
Yeah. And I know you had some really good social proof examples. I'm trying to think. You nailed on a couple really good ones not too long ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, what Nick had just said, people like us do things like this, is this sort of classic formulation from Seth Godin about how we think about ourselves in the world. And it's such a great example. Basically, I mean, we've covered a couple psychological principles about loss aversion and likability and building trust. But one of the key things that humans ask is, are people like me doing this?
Because they
And
don't
in
know.
fact, when it comes to really divisive political issues, which we're not going to dive into today, there's a lot of evidence that shows somebody who's close to them, who's like them, that can change their mind more effectively than data or stories that are disassociated from them. And that's because we're social creatures. Brene says we're hardwired for connection. So that's because that's our evolutionary advantage. Literally, all of our ancestors 10 plus thousands of years ago survived because they worked together. And so we have this evolutionary impulse to be in the tribe or in the community. And what are people like me doing so I can stay in the community
and be
and
safe.
be safe, right? So the safety factor is so crucial because when you provide social proof, the reason you're doing that is not because you get to say, this other company did what you did. Look at all the value we can provide. What you're actually doing is you're creating a sense of safety that yours is the middle option here. It's the safe choice for somebody to choose. And the reason is not because you provide all this great value and you have all these guarantees and on and on and on and on. It's because people like you did it and you want to be a part of the tribe. You want to be a part of the group that's doing it.
And before, we had to always rely on us saying it.
Right.
We're now with social media, and this is where the whole strategy really comes together if you take it seriously. Because if you're posting really good content that's trusted and credible, and people are sending it to others, and people are coming to you, that's social proof. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a much stronger social proof than you naming people's competitors or companies like them that they're aware of and saying, this is what we did for them. Don't get me wrong, that works. It works very well. But this is how you can hit the accelerator button on your sales and marketing is by getting people to start referring you. And we've seen lots of companies do a great job of this. Refine Labs does an incredible job at this,
Mm-hmm.
that they have a really great podcast. And, Chris puts out daily content that is so good and
Mm-hmm.
critical, whether it's a unique point of view or just how to do something that people have always wondered. So what do? They share it. Well, how many times does that get shared before you start to pay attention? And this is how sales and marketing can overlap so beautifully because now you're starting at a place 10 steps ahead where people that are cold calling have to go and make up for that in their conversations.
Right, and even the most effective cold calling scripts that I see floating around LinkedIn right now involve some level of social proof or referral. Basically, this other company did something that you also experienced, and so they bought our product and they solved that problem. Like that's sort of the basic formulation of it. I think the other reason social proof is so juicy in the marketing side of the equation, in which an individual sales rep is not involved in it, is you can do it asynchronously. People can learn about your company on their own time. So when the dark social dark funnel happens and they get a word of mouth referral from a trusted friend of theirs in a group that they're participating in, that means a lot more than an ad that pops up on Instagram. So the social proof in that instance is not happening as a result of your direct sales and marketing activities. It's happening because you just have a good product or a good company and you're delivering on your promises. You're building trust. But then you can leverage that social proof in a secondary way and put it on your website or put it in your materials so that so it doesn't have to be a direct component of a conversation or a call or a pitch. People can learn about it on their own time. One of the reasons that every site you go to has reviews, especially if they're a product, it's because people want to see that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's different ways. It just depends on the audience. If you're targeting a broad audience, yes, all of those little reviews in which they've embedded things from Twitter work really well because you get to see random other people who are also enjoying the product. But if you're selling something more, it depends on who you're going after always. But if you're selling something more luxurious or more expensive or something high class, you need a different way of displaying those testimonials, that social proof, that referral or recommendation, because that speaks to your audience that you're going after differently. So it really does come back to what's going to drive somebody to understand you're the right product or service. And the key component is who else like me is using this product or service.
Yeah, it takes the risk out of it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think you're making a major purchase for you or the company, the most dangerous thing is, what if you make a bad purchase? What happens? And that's what people are doing. It's I've realized in sales, it's very rare, unless somebody's going through a formal buying process, that you're actually getting put up against competitors. What you're really doing is you're competing with timelines and funding. Those funds are going to get spent regardless and invested in the business, but it's usually in, so if you're selling LinkedIn sales training and they're like, well, do we buy software or do we buy sales training?
Hmm.
Hmm. Or should we go and, upgrade our computer tech because now we're working from home and everybody's just using their home computers? Maybe we should go and buy them better cameras and mics so that they can go and, start a live show or do something that builds their credibility. So when customers are seeking them out, and will accelerate that sales process. And one thing I love about content, it
Hmm.
also, I realize that it doesn't trigger reactance.
Oh, yes. Reactance. You should say something on this. This is a great principle.
Well, as a kid, how many people love getting told what not to do, but don't know why? It is like, and you can throw it in the chat. People hate when some people tell you not to do something at a time that, like wet paint. If I told my
Hmm.
kiddo not to go and touch wet paint, actually better off my kiddo. If I told her not to go and play in the mud, what is she going to do?
Play in the
She's
mud.
surely going to come in covered in mud at any age, because it's just, that's how we work.
Hmm.
Run. What are we going to do? Run. And so we're challenging something, and we're putting our own timeline or our own sense of urgency, and it doesn't align with what people want. So it's a big step in a wrong direction, or at least it's what it can feel like. And it's the same thing as, so LinkedIn direct messages are a great example. You're trying to bring somebody where you are instead of meeting them where they're at. And that triggers this gut feeling of, this person's trying to sell me.
Hmm.
They don't know me because they didn't take the time, and they're accelerating that timeline. They don't know what they're talking about because they don't know anything about me. And so it's triggering all these different psychological drivers that are making your information moot.
Right.
You're done. They're bored. They're not going to listen. Bored people don't buy. People don't buy from people they don't like or that they don't deem credible. There's a few exceptions of people that I know that are exceptional, but it also plays to the status quo bias where people like them act like that. So it keeps going back to how we naturally make these decisions. And if we use this in our LinkedIn strategies, in our sales, and in our other marketing activities, it sets us up for success, and it essentially bypasses steps. And so what normally would have taken 2 to 3 months could take 2 weeks if you have a very considerable, like a very deliberate process that you're following that looks at how people are actually making decisions.
Yeah. I think what had just jumped into my mind is my reactance is against people who try and sell me, or people who try and pressure me into making a decision now.
Yeah.
That just doesn't go well with me. I'm somebody who likes to take my time and weigh my options. And honestly, most people do, right? Like even impulse purchases, I think are generally a myth. I just think people buy the things that they want when they're ready to buy them. And some of us are just more ready to buy things when we're when we want it.
Yeah.
Like and people are weird and wonky. In some areas they're very impulsive, in other areas they're not. Or in other areas they have other restrictions on that impulse, where they have a boss to report to, and the accountability that's being held in that relationship is, well, why did you spend so much money on this product we didn't use? And so there's loss aversion suddenly that comes into that consideration. If there's a buying committee, right, suddenly then, oh gosh, there's a lot of loss aversion at play, because you have lots of people's competing interests at heart. And honestly, understanding reactance, understanding this natural impulse that people are going to basically push back on your pressuring or your acceleration of the sales cycle, allows you to stop doing it.
Yeah.
Like you can just stop. You don't have to, right? Just have a conversation, build the trust, drop a comment, drop a second comment, send a
Hmm.
connection request, say thank you for connecting. When they don't respond, wait 3 weeks. Follow up with another conversation starter, or find a piece of content that you think is valuable to them and say, hey, I saw this and thought of you. What do you think? Share that content. If the conversation doesn't get started then, the conversation isn't going to get started at any point. And if you try and
Mm.
pitch them, they're going to reject you anyways. So being able instead to relax your pressure, to relax the idea that you have to sell using content, using direct messages, etc., and just being able to put little marbles in the marble jar or charge up the trust battery or whatever analogy you want there to build trust and just show up and have a conversation means 3 months down the line, you have a huge leverage point when they think finally of the problem that you solve. And we talk about this all the time. The demand generation play, basically, that when most people are not buying in a year, it's some small percentage. Lots of people throw around different figures:
Yeah,
3%, 5%,
3%.
8%, whatever. Okay. It's a small percentage of your total addressable market, your TAM, that is actually in the market at the moment you contact them. So the
Mm.
reason that you're building up trust and the reason you're leveraging these scientific principles we talked about and psychological principles we talked about is so that when they are in the market to buy, you're the first person they contact, right? You're the person that they call because finally they have the budget, the timing is right. They saw a new piece of creative you put out that they're like, oh, this is great. Okay, it's definitely time to like work with these folks. Or there's finally a follow up conversation that they had with an individual SDR that was really good. All of that is not, is it held in tension with a quota? Maybe. But if you have a good go to market motion between your marketing and sales, the hope is that some of the quota is going to be taken care of already.
Yeah, things will
This is
mature
a
at different
longer
rates.
term.
You just have to have
Go ahead.
enough. Oh, I was
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
say the biggest problem I see is people get too stuck on one or two things,
Hmm.
and they put too many eggs in one basket, and they're hoping, well, this is going to close. Well, this is going to close. Well, that close is based on trust, timeline, and budget. Like if you don't deliver on that value and you don't come at the right time, it just will never happen because there is nothing pressing about it. But content combined with social proof allows that to happen at scale because they're going to see all this information, and then social proof, expertise, challenging the status quo with other people that they trust and respect will open their mind up to receiving this information. And so maybe that follow up you do in 3 weeks after they've been consuming for the past 3 weeks, they're like, yeah, I'm ready to talk.
Hmm.
But there's things that we don't know, and that mainly that timeline and budget.
And this is also why I think platforms are so much better for this than putting them on an email list.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because I hate being put on email lists. I think it's very rude if I contact somebody and then suddenly I get promotional stuff from their company. I think that's
Yeah,
just
when I've
wrong.
never had an opt-in or anything, you're like,
Yeah, when
"Hmm,
I've never, I'm like,
personal
why am I
email,
getting
and now I'm on
this?
your
Like,
list? Really? How did that happen?"
that's not cool. But guess what? That happens on platforms by default because of the way the algorithms happen. People or the way the algorithm is wired, especially on LinkedIn, is people, a certain percentage will see your content because you commented on somebody's post, right? The people who follow that person, some percentage are going to see that. Some number of your connections are going to see that comment as well. And all of that is happening technically just by opting into the platform without necessarily opting into your email list. So the great fear in this, talking about loss aversion, is that we don't have direct contact with our leads. We need to put them on an email list. We need to send them emails directly. Well, guess what? They're probably not going to listen anyways. Okay. And when somebody is scrolling through a social platform like LinkedIn, they're actually expecting to see things like that. Think about priming, right?
Mhm.
When you log on to LinkedIn, you expect to see content. And hopefully you want to see good content too. You want to see stuff that's inspiring, that's engaging, that's educational, that helps you, right? Whatever it is, versus somebody already has 50 emails in their inbox. What's the 51st one? And what's another promotional? Here's the sixth promotional email of the month. Not that I'm bitter about this just because I've been on this before, but like this is very prescient in November and December. Every e-commerce outlet tries to do this. Like it's all promotional, promotional, promotional. And does it work? Well, maybe a certain percentage are probably going to respond. But it's not the same formulation as somebody who's passively engaging on a platform and seeing the value that you deliver. That is trust battery stuff. The email is probably draining the trust battery, or they just start to tune you out. And that's the worst thing. They
Yeah.
don't even say no, they just stop listening.
Yeah, just ignore you. I think as you were talking, I was really thinking about how people are using LinkedIn now, and especially with larger, more complex purchases, people are going to LinkedIn in their communities and they're talking. And I've heard quite a few people say this.
Hmm.
Started a lot with Chris, and recently I've actually been able to experience the other side of it where I've been getting referred. And so
Mm-hmm.
we saw your live show, we heard your podcast, or so and so did, and they referred your content to me so that we could go and use Sales Navigator better. And so it was really interesting. It made me realize that everything we're doing is driving word of mouth. And anytime we step out of this and we go direct, is we're trying to go direct with value with very personalized insight. And I think that's almost the deciding factor. It doesn't matter if it's sales or marketing, is are you trying to gain word of mouth, or are you trying to go and deliver like instant actions through personalized insight? So are you going direct to the source, or you kind of holding back and waiting for somebody to refer you? And that's almost now how I'm looking at it.
Hmm. Well, and actually, even just take a step back, some data I saw the other day is something like 85% of customers who are happy with their companies or their vendors are willing to give a referral. And only 15 to 17% of the sales staff actually ever ask for one. So if we think about trust and you have companies who not only trusted you enough to buy from you, but you delivered on your value and they're a very happy customer, you have a big leverage point there in order to ask them for a referral. And there's all sorts of ways to language that. That's not the important part. It's
Mm-hmm.
that you use or leverage that trust that you've built up to say, we're so excited that you're happy with this product. We would love for you. Is there somebody else? So this is actually maybe the language is important. Think about offering them an option again. Instead of this is this is actually NLP. This is neuro linguistic programming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead of asking, uh, well, let me know if there's somebody in your industry that would also benefit from that. That's a very passive ask. Most people won't engage with that. A more direct ask is there anyone in your industry that would benefit from that? But the problem that presents is the two options, right? It's yes or no. I do know somebody, I don't know somebody. And then it kind of feels awkward for that person. Okay. The third option is not actually to provide a power of three rule, it's to ask, who do you know in your industry that would benefit from this? Because now it's not who do you know, yes or no, it's who do you know? And now they can say, oh, I don't know anyone. And that feels like that's like, oh, I just don't know anyone. It's okay. I don't know anyone. But then if they know somebody, they're going to refer you to it. It's one of the most powerful languaging that you can use inside getting referrals. Who do you know in your industry that would benefit from this or something like that? Because now it's inviting them into a conversation and it's saying we're not just looking for somebody, but we value your insight and your expertise, and we want to know who you know that could also benefit from this. That's just a very small detailed example about a referral.
Yeah, most people that ask for referrals are too vague.
Hmm.
And so if I ask for something or ask for a recommendation or a referral, and I it doesn't paint a picture instantly in someone's head, it'll never happen.
Hmm.
And so like focus on just getting do you know one person?
Hmm.
That's one that I found very powerful. Do you know one person that is in industrial manufacturing that's going through this? Or, but you gotta like those primers, those things that help people categorize the information. Like, yeah, I do know somebody there. I don't know if they'd be interested. Like, that's fine if you want to just go and if you want to make an introduction. If you think it would be a good fit, I trust you.
Hmm. Yeah, you're centering them in that, yes, in that process, which is so
Yeah,
crucial.
because most people are trying to going back to that psychology, they're trying to force it, and then
Hmm.
people are going, no, I don't want to do that, there's nothing
Hmm.
in it for me. or you're going to make me look bad because I didn't like this experience.
Mhm.
And so these are all things, if you're looking at your sales process or you're looking at marketing and you're seeing there's a sticking point, this is what we need to ask ourselves.
Mhm.
One of the most common ones I see right now in sales is people just not showing up for meetings. Why did they book that meeting if they weren't going to show up?
Mhm.
Well, from my research as of right now, it's because you didn't deliver anything actually real that was of value right away, or you didn't allow them to say no. So they just booked the meeting so you'd go away.
Mhm. I've never done that, but I can see why people would, especially if you're in a highly pressured tactical environment. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. The last thing that, if there are questions that anybody watching has, please drop them in either of our chats. We'd love to answer them. Um, the thing that had just come to mind too is understanding the context in which somebody operates in, and there's lots of contexts. It's like a big layer cake. There's the company context, there's the personal context, there's a cultural context. One of the famous examples I remember in marketing is from Vision Spring. Maybe it's the nonprofit partner for Warby Parker. They give away glasses to millions of people around the world, and the example I think I remember was they were in a rural village in India, and the cultural context around that is very different than ours. There's not, options can be overwhelming, right? So even three options is very overwhelming. But the loss aversion principle stuck around. And so, the first setup that they had was there was a bunch of different glasses on a table, and they didn't have a lot of take up. And then they switched it around, in which after getting their eye examined, instead of being given options, they're given a pair of glasses, and then they're asked, would you like to keep them or not?
Yep.
And but that's understanding the context. That wouldn't work too well in the Canada or the US, right? Because we are used to options. We have the 7 different configurations at a fast food restaurant. That's part of our context. So being able to dive in and really understand not just the plain factors, the psychological factors that somebody has in their personal life, but really understanding the context in which they operate will allow you to craft language, craft outreach and conversations that are actually really useful. And when it comes to content, you can use those same things again and again. That's how you can create value. That's how you can create questions. That's how you can poke and prod a little bit to get their attention too, because they'll respond to that. People are funny about that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, well said. It seems so simple, and a lot of this is probably not new. But if we're not purposeful in how we put this all together, it will create bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks will slow down sales cycles or like kill them altogether. And so we need to be very purposeful of how we're working through our process so that we're working with how people naturally make decisions. And that really should start with how we're presenting ourselves, the content that we're putting out there, and being very purposeful, and even how we're making those first impressions through direct messages. And it all matters, even coming down to how your profile is set up when you send that direct message. If you have the wrong profile, people will smell the snake oil, and they're like, no, they're gonna just try to go in high pressure sell me.
Hmm.
So, and one thing I've noticed that works really well is don't do it by yourself. I ask Morgan's advice on profiles and write ups and stuff all the time. And I ask a lot of the people in my group or in my community, because there's nothing more dangerous than assuming knowledge. You always want to test it as soon as possible with as many people as possible, with it being targeted. And so this is why it's also important to build your LinkedIn community with just people that could be potential customers or people you want to partner with,
Hmm.
because then it's a way of testing at scale, and it allows you to grow faster.
Totally. It's so much easier not to do this alone. And same, I ask Nick for insights all the time. And that's the best part too. You get different
Yeah.
perspectives. We all have our own little limited reach in the world. We only know so much. I'm a big avid reader, and I've read a drop in the ocean worths of books in the world, and on very minimal topics too. So people have their own insights and their own perspectives. And one of the best ways to learn is just to ask, say, what do you think about it? And sometimes those conversations are really fruitful, and other times they may
Mhm.
not be. And both of those things are okay. right? It doesn't mean it was good or bad. It's just you learned something new. You learned X or Y, right, out of the conversation. So, yes, I totally agreed. So, are we at time? Is that
We're at time, and I want to
wow?
say thank you, Slava, for joining us.
Hmm.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Nathan,
Hmm.
Kit. Um,
Hello.
it
Thanks.
I don't have my chat pulled up, so
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
guys.
Sorry.
But
I was
yeah,
just reading off
yeah.
some names.
But thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate your questions and comments,
Mhm.
and look forward to seeing you again next week. Please, if you have anything in between now and then, feel free to shoot us a direct message, and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Absolutely. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining B2B Power Hour. Bye.
Take care. Bye.